Have you ever sat inside a car and thought, what were they thinking? Some interiors are elegant, some are futuristic, and then there's the 1977 Pontiac Bonneville, a car that defied logic with its design choices. General Motors has built some of the most legendary American cars, but this one left people confused. Was it luxury? Or was it an experiment gone too far? Stick with me till the end, and I'll reveal a surprising fact about this car's interior that even die-hard Pontiac fans might not know. The 1977 Bonneville, a forgotten masterpiece or a design oddity? The Pontiac Bonneville name had always carried a sense of prestige. It was Pontiac's way of saying, here's a car that gives you comfort, power, and presence. But by 1977, things were different. The world wasn't the same as it had been in the 1960s when massive, fuel-hungry cars ruled the roads. The oil crisis had hit, fuel prices were soaring, and American automakers were scrambling to adjust. People wanted efficiency, but they still craved the old-school comfort of full-size cars. This is where Pontiac stepped in. The 1977 Bonneville was part of GM's drastic effort to downsize its full-size lineup. It was still a big car, but compared to its predecessors, it had shrunk significantly. Yet, when you stepped inside, you wouldn't think of it as smaller. In fact, the interior was so unique, so oddly designed, that it made people pause. Some loved it, others not so much. A bold interior unlike anything else now. If you're familiar with 1970s American cars, you know they had a certain charm. Plush seats that felt like a living room couch, chrome details that added elegance, and dashboards designed with simplicity. But Pontiac decided to do something different. When you opened the door and sat inside the 1977 Bonneville, the first thing that stood out wasn't the seats, the steering wheel, or even the dashboard itself. It was how everything felt misplaced. It was as if Pontiac's designers had taken traditional car interior rules and thrown them out the window. The dashboard wasn't just an evolution of past designs, it was completely different. The placement of controls, the shape of the steering wheel, the layout of gauges, it was all just unusual. And yet, for some reason, it worked. What was Pontiac thinking? To understand why GM made these choices, we need to step back and look at the psychology of the time. The 1970s were a decade of transition. People were moving away from big extravagant designs and leaning toward a future where technology played a bigger role in everyday life. Car interiors were starting to reflect this shift. Pontiac wanted to make the Bonneville feel modern, even futuristic, but still familiar to older buyers who were used to traditional American luxury. But did they go too far? That's the question. Many drivers who sat inside the 1977 Bonneville for the first time found themselves confused. It wasn't the comfort that puzzled them, it was the strange design choices. Buttons weren't where you expected them to be. Some gauges felt like they had been positioned randomly. The steering wheel? Well, let's just say it didn't feel like the kind you'd find in a luxury cruiser. Pontiac was walking a fine line between innovation and alienation, and not everyone was on board. Some loved the fresh approach, while others missed the classic logical layouts of the past. Why does this interior still fascinate people today? Decades later, the 1977 Bonneville remains one of the most debated GM interiors ever. Some call it a misstep, others call it a bold experiment. But here's the thing, cars like this stick in people's minds. They aren't forgotten, and that tells us something important. In an era when many cars started looking and feeling the same, the Bonneville dared to be different. And if you think what you've heard so far is strange, wait until you learn about the dashboard layout, the bizarre climate control system, and the oddly designed door panels. Some of these choices will leave you wondering, did GM really expect people to like this? But stay with me, because in the next section, we'll break down the strangest dashboard Pontiac ever built. And trust me, you won't believe what they did with the gauges. Step inside the 1977 Pontiac Bonneville, and the first thing your eyes land on is the dashboard. Not the seats, not the steering wheel. Your attention goes straight to that long, oddly shaped slab of plastic, buttons and gauges stretching across the front. At first glance, it seems like a traditional American dashboard, but the more you look, the more things feel off. Pontiac, in an attempt to modernize the Bonneville, took a bold step. They redesigned the dashboard to look high-tech for its time, But in doing so, they created something that didn't quite feel like it belonged in a luxury sedan. Instead of the elegant, driver-focused layouts found in earlier Bonnevilles, this one felt flat, stretched out, and awkwardly arranged. The first major issue? The instrument cluster. In most cars, the speedometer is the centerpiece, easy to read at a glance. But Pontiac's designers decided to rethink that logic. The 1977 Bonneville featured a horizontal speedometer, where the numbers moved behind a fixed window. Drivers who were used to traditional dials found this setup confusing. It took longer to check your speed, and at night the dim lighting made it even harder to read. This design wasn't new, other GM cars had experimented with it, but it never really caught on. Why? Because it wasn't practical. Then there was the placement of secondary gauges. Instead of keeping everything in one neat cluster, Pontiac spread them out across the dashboard. The fuel gauge, temperature gauge, and warning lights weren't where you expected them to be. Some were pushed to the far right, almost out of the driver's line of sight. Others were positioned lower, requiring you to take your eyes off the road just to check your engine temperature. For a luxury car, this was a strange choice. Buttons and controls, a game of guesswork. If the gauges were oddly placed, the game was worthless. If the gauges were oddly placed, the buttons and switches were even worse. Pontiac packed the dashboard with a mix of knobs, sliders, and push buttons, each seemingly designed with a different philosophy. Take the climate control system, for example. In most cars of the era, adjusting the heater or air conditioning was straightforward. But in the Bonneville, Pontiac introduced tiny slider controls positioned in an awkward spot, forcing drivers to reach further than usual to adjust the temperature. Even stranger was the wiper control placement. Instead of being on the steering column where most American drivers expected it, Pontiac decided to put it on the dashboard. If you weren't familiar with the car, you'd spend a few seconds searching for it, especially in a sudden rainstorm. The radio controls were another design mystery. Pontiac mounted them slightly lower than usual, requiring the driver to look down while driving. And the cigarette lighter, an essential feature in the 1970s, was tucked away in a spot that felt like an afterthought. It's as if Pontiac's engineers designed each section of the dashboard separately, then put them all together without making sure they worked in harmony. A design that aged poorly. One of the biggest issues with the 1977 Bonneville's dashboard wasn't just its layout, it was the materials Pontiac used to build it. By the late 1970s, American automakers were under pressure to cut costs. The days of real wood, thick chrome, and heavy metal panels were fading. Instead, GM started using hard plastics, cheap vinyl, and faux wood trim. The result? A dashboard that looked fine when the car was new, but didn't hold up over time. As the years passed, many Bonneville dashboards cracked under sunlight, especially in warmer climates. The fake wood paneling peeled, the plastic buttons became brittle, and the entire design, once considered futuristic, started to feel outdated. This wasn't just a Pontiac problem. Many GM cars from this era suffered from poor material quality. But in a car like the Bonneville, which was marketed as a premium vehicle, it felt like a letdown. Did Pontiac overthink it? The 1977 Bonneville's dashboard was a strange mix of bold ideas and frustrating execution. Pontiac tried to create something modern, but in the process they ignored some of the basic principles of good interior design. Instead of making the driver's experience simpler and more intuitive, they made it more complicated. Instead of refining proven ideas, they experimented. Some of those ideas worked, others didn't. For older drivers at the time, many of whom had spent decades driving traditional American sedans, the changes weren't exciting, they were annoying. And that's the fascinating thing about the 1977 Bonneville. It wasn't just a car, it was a reflection of a changing era. GM was trying to balance the old with the new, luxury with cost-cutting, familiarity with innovation, and sometimes that balance didn't quite work. But if you think the dashboard was unusual, wait until we take a closer look at the steering wheel and the seating design. Because what Pontiac did with those will make you wonder, did they even test this before selling it? If the dashboard of the 1977 Pontiac Bonneville felt odd, the steering wheel was even stranger. A steering wheel is more than just a tool to control a car. It's something a driver interacts with constantly. It should feel comfortable, intuitive, and solid. But Pontiac took a different approach. At first glance, the steering wheel looked like it belonged in a spaceship, not a luxury sedan. Instead of the traditional 3-spoke or 2-spoke design found in most American cars of the time, Pontiac introduced a thin, angular-shaped 2-spoke wheel that felt awkward in the hands of many drivers. The spokes stretched horizontally, leaving large empty spaces at the top and bottom. It was a style-first approach, but one that sacrificed function. For older drivers, this was frustrating. The thin rim made it harder to grip compared to the thick, padded steering wheels of the past, and the shape designed to look sleek and modern felt unnatural when turning the car. Many drivers who had spent decades behind traditional American sedans found themselves uncomfortable with the lack of a third spoke for better hand placement. Pontiac's obsession with the future. To understand why Pontiac made these choices, you have to look at the 1970s design trends. Car companies were obsessed with looking futuristic. This was the decade when digital displays, space-age graphics, and experimental designs started appearing in everyday products. Pontiac wanted the Bonneville to reflect this vision of the future, but they forgot one key thing. Design should serve function first. A steering wheel shouldn't just look futuristic, it should feel natural. And that's where Pontiac missed the mark. The radial-tuned suspension marketing gimmick adding to the unusual steering experience was Pontiac's radial-tuned suspension (RTS) system. GM heavily advertised it as a game-changer for ride comfort and handling. It was designed to work better with radial tires, which were becoming the industry standard at the time. On paper, this seemed like a brilliant feature, but in practice, the steering response felt disconnected. The combination of the thin, oddly shaped steering wheel and the soft suspension tuning made the car feel vague on the road. Drivers who were used to the heavy, direct steering of older full-size American cars felt a noticeable difference. For highway cruising, the Bonneville still delivered a smooth, floating ride, but for those who enjoyed a strong, confident steering feel, the changes were disappointing. The RTS system worked best on long, straight roads, but when navigating sharp turns or parking lots, drivers found themselves constantly adjusting the wheel, searching for a more natural feel, a horn placement that made no sense. If the steering wheel shape wasn't strange enough, Pontiac made another questionable decision: the horn placement. Instead of a large horn pad in the center, Pontiac placed small horn buttons on the spokes. For drivers who had spent decades pressing the center of the wheel to honk, this was annoying. Many instinctively hit the center, only to realize nothing happened. It forced drivers to relearn something they had been doing the same way for years. This change wasn't just inconvenient, it was dangerous. Imagine a moment when a driver needed to honk quickly to avoid an accident. Instead of instinctively pressing the center, they had to hunt for the tiny buttons. The tilt steering mechanism. A small redemption, despite all these odd choices. There was one feature that drivers appreciated: the tilt steering column. The 1977 Bonneville offered a multi-position tilt steering mechanism, allowing drivers to adjust the wheel's angle for better comfort. For older drivers, this was a welcome improvement. It made getting in and out of the car easier and allowed for a more customized driving position. In an era when many full-size cars had fixed steering columns, this feature gave Pontiac a slight edge in terms of driver comfort. However, even this came with a flaw. The adjustment lever was small and oddly placed, making it less intuitive than it should have been. Once again, Pontiac had a great idea but poor execution. The steering feel soft, yet uninspiring. Driving the Bonneville, one thing became clear: the steering was too light. In an attempt to make the car feel effortless, Pontiac engineered the power steering system to require very little input. At low speeds, this was great. It made parking and slow maneuvering incredibly easy, but on the highway, it felt numb. Many older drivers were used to firm, responsive steering, where they could feel the road through the wheel. But the Bonneville's steering was so over-assisted that it felt disconnected. It required constant small corrections, especially at higher speeds. This was the opposite of what Pontiac had been known for in previous decades. Cars like the GTO, Grand Prix, and earlier Bonnevilles had a reputation for solid road feel. But by 1977, GM's focus had shifted more toward comfort than engagement. A steering design that divided opinions, Pontiac's steering choices in the 1977 Bonneville remain one of the most debated aspects of the car. Some appreciated the effortless feel, especially for long-distance cruising. Others hated how detached and artificial it felt. The steering wheel's shape, the horn placement, the over-assisted feel, each of these factors made the car feel less engaging than past generations. Instead of evolving Pontiac's steering design, GM had created something that left many drivers frustrated, and if you thought the steering wheel was a bold experiment, wait until you hear about the Bonneville's seats. Because Pontiac made some shocking choices that completely changed how people experienced comfort in this car. Sit inside the 1977 Pontiac Bonneville, and you'll quickly notice something unusual. The seats. In a car that was marketed as a full-size luxury sedan, you'd expect plush, supportive, and well-crafted seating. But Pontiac took an approach that left many drivers and passengers both impressed and confused. At first glance, the seats looked inviting. They were large, wide, and covered in thick, cushioned upholstery, just like you'd find in a classic American luxury car. But the moment you sat down, something felt off. Soft to the point of being uncomfortable, American luxury cars in the 1970s were known for their overstuffed, pillow-like seats. The goal was simple: maximum comfort. But Pontiac went too far. The seats in the Bonneville were so soft that they lacked proper support. Instead of holding the driver in a stable position, they almost swallowed the person sitting in them. For short trips, this felt comfortable, but on long drives it became a problem. Older drivers in particular felt the strain. Instead of keeping the lower back and legs in a natural ergonomic position, the seats allowed too much sinking, leading to discomfort over time. Many drivers complained of fatigue because the seats didn't provide the proper structure to keep the body aligned. This was especially noticeable in the driver's seat. Unlike European luxury cars of the time, which had firm, supportive seats, the Bonneville's seating felt like a living room couch on wheels, great for relaxing, but not ideal for driving. A choice that aged poorly. Pontiac offered the Bonneville seats in two main materials: plush velour and imitation leather vinyl. At the time, velour was seen as the high-end choice, offering a soft, luxurious feel that was meant to mimic the comfort of high-quality home furniture. It looked and felt premium when the car was new, but over time, velour had a serious problem. It wore out quickly. By the early 1980s, many Bonneville interiors showed heavy wear, especially on the driver's seat. The soft fabric started to matte down and lose its texture, giving it a cheap, worn-out appearance. In warmer climates, velour also had another issue: it trapped heat. The alternative? Vinyl. Pontiac's faux leather option seemed like the more durable choice, but it came with its own set of problems. In the summer, it became sticky and unbearably hot. In the winter, it turned stiff and uncomfortable. For a luxury car, neither material was perfect, and long-term owners found themselves constantly fighting against wear and tear. A bench seat that felt like a sofa. One of the signature features of full-size American cars in the 1970s was the bench seat. Unlike modern cars with separate bucket seats, the Bonneville's front bench stretched across the entire width of the cabin, allowing 3 passengers to sit in the front row. This setup had advantages and disadvantages. On one hand, it made the Bonneville feel spacious, like a rolling living room. Passengers had plenty of room to stretch out, and the lack of a center console made the cabin feel open and inviting. But for the driver, the bench seat posed a problem. Without proper side bolstering, there was nothing to keep you in place during turns. Drivers often found themselves sliding from side to side, especially during sharper corners. And then there was the lap belt issue. Since the front bench allowed for a third passenger, Pontiac used a lap belt for the middle seat. While this was standard for the time, it became outdated by the 1980s as 3-point seat belts became the norm. Split bench. V's bucket seats, an unusual option. Pontiac also offered an optional split bench seat, which was meant to provide a more driver-featured experience. This design gave the front seats a slight separation, with an individual recline function for more comfort. But here's where things got interesting. If you chose the sportier Bonneville Brougham model, you could actually get bucket seats with a center console and floor shifter. This was rare for a full-size luxury sedan and made the Bonneville feel almost like a muscle car inside. But there was a trade-off. The bucket seats didn't match the softness of the bench, and some buyers felt they weren't as luxurious as they expected. Pontiac was trying to appeal to both comfort seekers and performance lovers, but in the end, neither group was completely satisfied. An armrest that was too small to matter. Another odd design choice was the center armrest. In most full-size luxury cars, the fold-down armrest in the front seat was wide and supportive, giving drivers and passengers a place to rest their elbows comfortably. But in the Bonneville, the armrest was too small and too low. Instead of providing proper support, it felt like an afterthought. Many drivers barely used it because it wasn't positioned high enough to be comfortable. Backseat comfort, roomy but flawed. For rear passengers, the Bonneville offered plenty of space. The backseat was wide, cushioned, and designed for maximum legroom. It was the kind of space you'd expect in a car that measured over 220 inches in length. But Pontiac made one crucial mistake. The rear seat padding was even softer than the front. While this made for a comfortable short ride, it wasn't ideal for long-distance trips. Older passengers, especially those who needed good lumbar support, often found the rear seats too plush, leading to back pain over time. The low seat height also made it harder for some people to get in and out of the car, particularly for seniors who preferred higher seating positions. Luxury that didn't age well at the time, Pontiac believed they were creating a luxurious seating experience, and in many ways they succeeded. The Bonneville's seats were big, soft, and inviting, perfect for the casual cruiser. But over time, the flaws became more obvious. The materials didn't hold up well, the lack of support led to fatigue, and the bench seat design felt outdated by the 1980s. Pontiac had built a car that was comfortable at first, but not comfortable in the long run. And if the seats felt outdated, wait until you hear about the Bonneville's bizarre door panel design. Because Pontiac made choices that left even the most loyal GM fans scratching their heads. Owner the 1977 Pontiac Bonneville's door, and the first thing you notice isn't the size, it's the design. Pontiac was clearly trying to make the Bonneville feel premium, but in doing so they made choices that left drivers and passengers both impressed and puzzled. Plush padding, yet unpractical decision. In the 1970s, American luxury cars followed a common trend: thickly padded interiors. The Bonneville was no exception. Instead of using simple flat door panels, Pontiac went all in on soft, cushioned materials, giving the door panels a plush, almost pillow-like feel. This was meant to enhance comfort and luxury. When you rested your arm on the door panel, it felt soft and inviting, a step above the hard plastics used in many cheaper cars. But this design came with a major flaw. The padding didn't hold up well over time. Just like the seats, the door panel upholstery tended to sag and wrinkle after a few years. In warmer climates, the padding would sometimes detach from the panel, creating an unappealing bubbled effect. For a car that was meant to exude class, this was a serious oversight. A strange use of wood trim. Pontiac wanted to compete with Cadillac and Lincoln, and one way to do that was to add wood trim to the door panels. But instead of using real wood, they opted for simulated wood-grained plastic. At first glance, this trim looked convincing. It had a rich, deep grain that mimicked high-end luxury cars. But the problem? It didn't feel real. When you tapped on it, you could immediately tell it was just a plastic insert. Worse, the fake wood didn't age gracefully. Over time, it became brittle, developing cracks and fading under sunlight. By the mid-1980s, many Bonneville owners found themselves staring at peeling and discolored trim, making the interior look cheap and worn out. For a car that was meant to feel expensive, this design choice was a clear miss. Oversized door handles, a blessing and a curse. One thing Pontiac did get right was the size of the door handles. Unlike some smaller cars that had delicate, flimsy handles, the Bonneville featured large, sturdy chrome handles that felt solid in your hand. This was especially important for older drivers. Many luxury car buyers in the 1970s were in their 40s, 50s, or older, and they wanted controls that were easy to grip and use. The Bonneville delivered on that front, at least at first. But there was a catch. While the handles were sturdy, the locking mechanism inside the door wasn't. Over time, the interior lock system became notoriously unreliable. Owners reported that the door locks would jam or stop working entirely, requiring frequent repairs. This became even more frustrating in the colder northern states like Michigan, New York, and Canada, where the locks could freeze in winter, leaving drivers struggling to open their own car. Chrome trim, a double-edged sword. Pontiac loved chrome accents, and the Bonneville's door panels had plenty of them. The handles, window cranks, and even the trim along the armrests were all polished chrome. giving the interior a classic upscale appearance. When the car was brand new, this chrome detailing made the interior feel high-end. But after a few years, owners began to notice a problem. Chrome trim was prone to scratching and tarnishing. If you rested your arm on the door too often, the chrome plating on the armrest trim would start to wear off, revealing the dull metal underneath. In areas with high humidity, the chrome could even pit and corrode, giving the once luxurious door panel a cheap, worn-out look. For a car that was meant to last, these small design flaws added up quickly. Odd placement of window and lock controls. Another strange decision Pontiac made was the placement of the power window and lock switches. Instead of being in a natural, easy-to-reach spot, they were positioned in a way that felt awkward and unnatural for many drivers. On the bench seat models, the window controls were mounted on the armrest, which seemed fine until you actually tried to use them. Drivers had to stretch their fingers at an odd angle to press the buttons, making the simple task of rolling down a window more difficult than it needed to be. For passengers in the back seat, it was even worse. The window controls were placed far forward, making it inconvenient to adjust the windows without leaning forward. For a car that was supposed to be built for comfort, these small frustrations added up over time. Map pockets that nobody used to add a touch of practicality. Pontiac included small map pockets on the lower part of the door panels. This seemed like a good idea, until you actually tried using them. The pockets were too small to hold anything larger than a folded piece of paper, and because they were made of thin material, they often stretched out and lost their shape. Worse, these pockets were placed so low that most drivers and passengers ignored them entirely. Instead of being a useful feature, they became just another design element that didn't make sense. A mix of luxury and missed opportunities. Pontiac clearly put a lot of thought into making the Bonneville's door panels look upscale, but in the process they made critical mistakes. The plush padding, fake wood, oversized chrome handles, and poorly placed controls created an experience that felt both luxurious and frustrating at the same time. For new buyers, the Bonneville's interior felt premium and inviting. But as the years went by, many owners found themselves dealing with worn-out upholstery, peeling trim, unreliable locks, and frustrating ergonomics. Pontiac had built a door panel that was meant to impress, but in the end, it became a symbol of why American luxury cars struggled to keep up with their European rivals. Sit inside the 1977 Pontiac Bonneville, and your eyes are immediately drawn to the dashboard. A bold, oversized structure that tries to be both luxurious and futuristic, but ends up being an example of over-the-top American design. It's big, it's wide, and it's filled with choices that make you question Pontiac's design philosophy. A wall of plastic and vinyl. One of the first things you notice about the Bonneville's dashboard is just how much of it there is. In an era when luxury meant size, Pontiac made sure the dashboard felt massive, stretching across the cabin like a control panel from a spaceship. But here's where things take an odd turn. Despite its imposing presence, the materials used weren't exactly high-end. Pontiac wrapped the entire dashboard in padded vinyl, a trend in the 1970s meant to add softness and safety. While it looked plush at first, time wasn't kind to it. Over the years, the vinyl cracked, peeled, and even bubbled under heat, especially in warmer states like Arizona and Texas. The dashboard's surface, once a symbol of luxury, became a reminder of how poorly aging American interiors could look. The wood grain illusion. Pontiac was determined to make the Bonneville feel premium, and that meant adding wood grain trim across the dashboard. But, just like on the door panels, it wasn't real wood. It was simulated wood grain plastic. At first glance, it looked decent, but the illusion didn't last long. Exposure to sunlight and temperature changes made the fake wood fade and crack, giving the dashboard an aged, neglected look within a few years. This was a common problem in American cars of the era. While Cadillac and Lincoln at least tried to use higher quality materials, Pontiac's approach felt like an afterthought. A thin layer of plastic that pretended to be luxurious but couldn't stand the test of time. The instrument cluster, a mix of classic and confusing. One of the most intriguing aspects of the Bonneville's interior was its instrument cluster. Pontiac aimed for a design that felt sophisticated, but instead they created something that felt oddly cluttered. Unlike modern dashboards that prioritize simplicity and clarity, the Bonneville's gauges were spread out, deep-set, and hard to read at a glance. The speedometer in particular was a long horizontal bar, a design choice that was supposed to look futuristic but ended up being awkward and impractical. The biggest problem? Legibility. The long speedometer strip had tiny white numbers that could be difficult to read in dim lighting. At night, the backlighting wasn't strong enough, making it hard for drivers to check their speed without straining their eyes. Then came the secondary gauges: fuel, temperature, oil pressure, and alternator. Instead of placing them in a convenient cluster, Pontiac scattered them across the panel, making drivers hunt for information instead of seeing it at a glance. For a car that was supposed to be smooth and effortless to drive, this layout added an unexpected layer of difficulty. Oversized steering wheel. A struggle in itself. The steering wheel in the 1977 Bonneville was another story. It was massive, both in diameter and thickness, making it feel more like a ship's wheel than a car's. Pontiac's reasoning was simple. Larger steering wheels provided better leverage, especially in an era when power steering wasn't as refined as it is today. But for many drivers, it was too much. The wheel's sheer size made maneuvering feel cumbersome, especially in tight city driving. Parking this car required extra effort, and despite the presence of power steering, many drivers still found the wheel excessively heavy at low speeds. But perhaps the biggest strange decision was the steering wheel's rim. Unlike modern cars that offer a comfortable ergonomic grip, the Bonneville's wheel was thin and slippery, making long drives more tiring than they should have been. A dashboard clock that rarely worked, Pontiac, like many American automakers, believed that a dashboard clock added a touch of class. The Bonneville came with a small analog clock neatly embedded into the dash. It looked elegant, giving the car a sophisticated feel. But there was a catch: it rarely kept accurate time. Pontiac used mechanical clocks in many of their models, and by the late 1970s, these clocks had developed a reputation for being unreliable. They would lose minutes, stop working altogether, or tick inconsistently. Many Bonneville owners simply gave up on them and left the clock frozen in time, a symbol of the car's hit-or-miss quality control. Oddly placed climate control's luxury means comfort, and comfort means climate control that's easy to use. But Pontiac made an interesting decision with the Bonneville. The heater and air conditioning controls were placed in a somewhat awkward position. Instead of being intuitively placed within easy reach, they were positioned too low on the dashboard, forcing drivers to take their eyes off the road when adjusting them. The sliders for temperature and fan speed were simple enough, but their placement made quick adjustments inconvenient, especially while driving. For a car meant to offer a stress-free experience, this was another strange ergonomic mistake. Cigarette lighter and ashtrays a sign of the times. The 1970s were a different era, and smoking in cars was not only common, but expected. Pontiac designed the Bonneville with this culture in mind, equipping it with multiple ashtrays and a built-in cigarette lighter. The lighter was placed prominently on the dashboard, easily accessible to both the driver and front passenger. But here's where it gets interesting. There were multiple ashtrays, including one in the back seat, ensuring that passengers in all rows had a convenient place to put out their cigarettes. Today, this seems outdated, but in the 1970s, it was a standard feature. Many Bonneville owners used these ashtrays for coins, keys, or other small items rather than for smoking. A dashboard that had personality, but at a cost. The Bonneville's dashboard was a perfect reflection of 1970s American luxury, big, bold, and full of questionable choices. It had style, but it also had flaws that became more apparent over time. From the padded vinyl that didn't age well, to the clunky instrument layout, it was a mix of comfort and confusion. The oversized steering wheel, unreliable clock, awkward climate controls, and fake wood trim all made the Bonneville a fascinating but flawed creation. For drivers who bought the Bonneville new, the dashboard likely felt impressive and high-tech, but as the years passed, it became a reminder of why American luxury cars of the era struggled to compete with European brands. Pontiac had built a dashboard that stood out, but unfortunately not always for the right reasons. Sit inside the 1977 Pontiac Bonneville, and the first thing you'll notice, after taking in that oversized dashboard, is the seating. Plush, oversized, and covered in soft velour or premium vinyl, these seats were designed to make you feel like you were sitting in your living room recliner. Pontiac wasn't just selling a car, it was selling comfort on wheels. But As with much of the Bonneville's interior, there was more than meets the eye. What looked like the ultimate luxury often came with its own set of flaws. Couch-like comfort, the softest seats ever. By the late 1970s, American car manufacturers had perfected the art of cushy seating. The Bonneville was no exception. The front and rear seats were massive, offering plenty of legroom, headroom, and width. Instead of firm, structured seats like those found in European luxury cars, Pontiac went for a deep, plush design. The seats were so soft that when you sat down, you sank into them like a pillow. For long highway drives, this created a smooth and relaxing experience, almost like riding on a floating sofa. But there was a downside. While soft seats were comfortable at first, they lacked proper support. On short trips, they felt amazing, but on longer drives, many owners started feeling the strain. Without enough lower back support, these seats could make a long road trip feel tiring rather than refreshing. Bench seats. The dying era of classic American seating. Another notable feature of the Bonneville's interior was its front bench seat. By the late 70s, many luxury cars were shifting to bucket seats with a center console. But Pontiac kept things classic, offering a full-width bench seat in the front. This design allowed for 3 people to sit comfortably in the front row, a feature that was once common in American cars but was quickly disappearing. The idea was simple: make the Bonneville feel as spacious as possible, but this also meant that driver support was sacrificed. Without separate bucket seats, there was less side support, making it harder to stay planted in place during turns. For casual highway cruising, this wasn't a problem, but if you had to take sharp corners or make quick maneuvers, you'd find yourself sliding across the seat. Velour vs vinyl. A decision that defined luxury, Pontiac offered 2 primary seat material options: velour or vinyl. Each had its own personality, strengths, and weaknesses. Velour seats were the more premium choice. They felt soft, warm, and luxurious, offering a plush, inviting feel. But there was a problem. Velour was notoriously difficult to keep clean. It absorbed dust, dirt, and even body oils over time, meaning that without frequent maintenance, these seats would start looking worn out. Vinyl seats, on the other hand, were the more practical option. They were easy to clean, resistant to stains, and could handle years of wear and tear. But in warm weather, they had a serious drawback. They became sticky and uncomfortable. On a hot summer day, sitting on a vinyl seat with short sleeves meant dealing with that unpleasant sticking sensation. Power adjustments, luxury, but not always reliable. For a car designed to be smooth and effortless, Pontiac made sure the Bonneville's seats could be adjusted with ease. Many models came equipped with power-adjustable seats, allowing the driver to fine-tune their seating position with the push of a button. But, as with many electrical features of the 1970s, these systems were not always reliable. Over time, power seat motors had a tendency to fail, leaving drivers stuck in awkward or uncomfortable seating positions. If the seat controls stopped working, adjusting the seat became a frustrating manual process. Rear seats, a first-class experience or a letdown? Step into the back of the Bonneville and you were met with a surprising amount of space. Pontiac made sure that rear passengers had plenty of room to stretch out, making the Bonneville a true full-size luxury cruiser. But the real standout feature? The softness. The rear seats were just as cushy and overstuffed as the front. For passengers, this meant one thing: absolute comfort. Whether you were on a short drive or a long-distance road trip, the back seat experience felt plush and relaxing. But again, there was a trade-off. Just like in the front, the rear seats lacked proper support. On short trips, this wasn't an issue, but for longer rides, passengers sometimes felt fatigued from the lack of lumbar support. Another interesting design choice was the angle of the rear seat back. Instead of a deep recline like modern luxury cars, the Bonneville's rear seats had a more upright seating position, which some found less than ideal for extended trips. The center armrest, a feature that felt more luxurious than it was, Pontiac included a center fold-down armrest in the rear, adding to the luxury experience. This was a simple but effective touch, giving rear passengers a place to rest their arms and feel like they were in a high-end sedan. But here's where it got interesting. The armrest was thin and not very padded. It looked luxurious, but in reality, it didn't offer much real comfort. It was more about aesthetics than function, a common theme in the Bonneville's interior design. Seatbelts. A step towards safety, but with old-school flaws. By 1977, seatbelts were mandatory, and Pontiac equipped the Bonneville with 3-point seatbelts in the front and lap belts in the rear. But these weren't the modern retractable belts we're used to today. Instead, the seatbelts were bulky, stiff, and often frustrating to use. They didn't adjust easily, meaning passengers frequently had to struggle to find a comfortable fit. For many drivers in the 1970s, seatbelt use was still optional in daily driving, and the awkward design didn't encourage people to wear them. The seating experience, a mixed bag of comfort and compromise. Pontiac designed the Bonneville's seats to be plush, inviting, and spacious. For short trips, they provided unmatched comfort, making the car feel like a rolling lounge. But for longer drives, the lack of support and ergonomics became more noticeable. With soft velour or easy-to-clean vinyl, a massive front bench seat, and a spacious rear cabin, the Bonneville delivered an old-school luxury experience. But as time passed, its flaws, sinking cushions, aging materials, and unreliable power adjustments became apparent. For those who loved the classic American land yacht feel, the Bonneville was a dream. But for those looking for modern comfort and support, it was a reminder of why automotive seating evolved in the decades that followed. The 1977 Pontiac Bonneville didn't just impress with its plush seating and spacious cabin, it also featured a dashboard design that was unlike anything else on the road. It was big, bold, and packed with quirky details that set it apart. But, as with everything in this car, it was a mix of luxury, innovation, and some rather strange design choices. From the wood grain accents to the array of dials and switches, the Bonneville's dashboard was a reflection of 1970s American automotive design, where form often took priority over function. It looked like something straight out of a high-end lounge. But was it really as practical as it seemed? A massive slab of design, bigger than it needed to be. One of the first things you'd notice when sitting in the driver's seat was just how massive the dashboard was. It stretched across the entire cabin, creating a wide, almost intimidating presence. Compared to modern cars, where dashboards are sleek and compact, the Bonneville's dash felt like a wall in front of you. Pontiac made sure to cover every inch with materials that felt upscale. Soft padding, chrome detailing, and that signature simulated wood grain trim. To the untrained eye, it looked like real wood, but in reality, it was just a cleverly textured plastic veneer. It gave the car an expensive look, even if the material itself wasn't exactly high-end. The sheer size of the dashboard was partly due to how far the windshield was pushed forward. This was common in full-size American cars of the era. Designers wanted to create a sense of depth and space, even if it made the interior feel a bit cavernous. The instrument cluster, a blend of classic and futuristic, right in front of the driver sat one of the most distinctive features of the Bonneville's interior. The instrument cluster. Unlike modern cars where digital screens provide instant information, the Bonneville used a series of large, easy-to-read dials that were deeply recessed into the dash. At the center was the speedometer, which featured a horizontal rolling drum instead of a traditional needle. This was a common feature in GM cars of the era, designed to look more advanced, yet functionally it wasn't as precise as a standard circular gauge. To the left you'd find the fuel gauge and warning lights, while the right side housed the temperature and oil pressure gauges. Everything was laid out in a way that was simple and logical, but some drivers found the small font and deep-set dials hard to read at a glance. And then there was the clock. A signature touch of luxury in 1970s cars, the Bonneville's analog clock sat prominently on the dash. It wasn't digital, it wasn't particularly fancy, but it was a reminder of a time when even basic timekeeping was considered an extra feature. Switches, knobs, and sliders. The 1970s version of technology won. Of the most unusual things about the Bonneville's dashboard was the array of buttons and controls. Instead of a simple layout, Pontiac gave drivers a collection of sliders, rotary dials, and push buttons scattered across the dash in a way that wasn't always intuitive. The climate control system used horizontal sliders rather than rotary knobs, which was a design trend of the time. It looked futuristic, but wasn't as easy to use as a simple dial. The headlight switch wasn't on a stalk like modern cars. It was a pull knob, located to the left of the steering wheel. The radio had a mix of push buttons and manual tuning knobs, with a large dial that glowed softly at night. And then there was the cigarette lighter and ashtray, which were standard features in almost every car of the era. In the Bonneville, the lighter was placed conveniently on the dash, and the ashtray was large enough to hold a full pack's worth of ashes. Clear evidence of how different driving culture was back then. The steering wheel. Thin, large, and packed with features, Pontiac gave the Bonneville a steering wheel that was both stylish and impractical. It was large and thin, designed to provide a comfortable grip, but its size made it feel more like piloting a boat than driving a car. The wheel was trimmed in soft vinyl or optional leather, and in the center sat the horn pad, which was oversized and integrated into the wheel's design. This meant you could press almost anywhere on the center and activate the horn. A convenient feature, but one that sometimes led to accidental honking when maneuvering in tight spaces. Some Bonneville models were equipped with steering wheel mount radio controls, a feature that was decades ahead of its time. But these early controls were not as refined as today's systems. They were often slow to respond and prone to breaking down over time. The glove box, surprisingly small for a car this large. For a car that was all about size and space, the Bonneville's glove box was surprisingly small. It was positioned low on the passenger side, and while it could hold a few essential items, it wasn't nearly as large as one might expect from such a full-sized luxury car. Inside, you'd often find the original owner's manual, a pack of tissues, and maybe a map or two. Reminders of a time before GPS and digital displays. Nighttime driving, a unique glow of the past. One of the most memorable experiences in the Bonneville was driving at night. When the sun went down, the dashboard came to life with a soft greenish glow, illuminating the dials, switches, and radio controls. This was an era before high-tech digital displays, so Pontiac relied on backlit dials and glowing needles to create a sense of modern luxury. It wasn't as bright or crisp as today's LED-lit dashboards, but it had a certain charm that many classic car owners still appreciate today, a dashboard that defined an era. The Bonneville's dashboard was a perfect representation of 1970s American car design, big, bold, and full of quirky details. It had a classic charm, but it wasn't always the most practical or efficient layout. From the massive wood-grained paneling to the deep-set instrument cluster and unique switchgear, everything about it felt like a time capsule from an era when cars were designed to impress rather than prioritize ergonomics. It was luxurious, stylish, and unmistakably American, just like the rest of the car. But as the automotive world moved forward, it became clear that this kind of dashboard layout was a relic of the past. What once seemed like the height of luxury eventually became a symbol of how car interiors needed to evolve. The 1977 Pontiac Bonneville wasn't just about flashy dashboards and oversized steering wheels, it was about comfort. And not just any comfort, but the kind that made you feel like you were sitting in your favorite armchair at home. Back in the 1970s, American luxury cars were designed with one thing in mind, giving drivers and passengers a plush, cloud-like experience. And Pontiac took this philosophy seriously. The seats in the Bonneville weren't just seats. They were soft, cushioned, and designed to make even the longest drives feel effortless. Pillow-tufted velour, the ultimate 1970s statement. The Bonneville seats weren't just comfortable, they were visually dramatic. Buyers could choose between rich velour or premium leather upholstery, but the pillow-tufted velour was the true star of the show. This wasn't just a simple fabric stretched over foam. Pontiac designed the seats with deep plush cushions that looked more like a high-end sofa than a car seat. The velour material gave the interior a warm, inviting feel, and the tufted design added an extra level of luxury and elegance. It wasn't just about aesthetics either. The thick cushioning absorbed road vibrations, making the ride feel incredibly smooth, even on rough roads. This was the era of soft floating suspensions, and the seats were built to enhance that experience. For many Bonneville owners, sitting in the car felt more like relaxing in a lounge than driving a vehicle. It was the kind of comfort that modern cars, with their firmer, sportier seats, simply don't offer anymore. Front bench seat, more like a sofa than a car seat. One of the most defining features of the Bonneville's interior was the front bench seat. Unlike today's cars, which have separate driver and passenger seats, the Bonneville had a full-width front bench, meaning up to 3 people could sit in the front row. This wasn't just about maximizing space. It was about maintaining that traditional American luxury feel. The bench seat allowed couples to sit close together, something that's rarely seen in modern cars. In fact, many owners fondly remember how it made the car feel more intimate, almost like a rolling lounge. But while the bench seat was comfortable, it wasn't the most practical. There was no center console, which meant fewer storage options. And because it was one continuous seat, there wasn't much lateral support for spirited driving. Not that anyone was taking a Bonneville around corners like a sports car. Pontiac did include armrests on some models, giving drivers and passengers a little extra support. But overall, this seat was built for cruising, not carving up back roads. Reclining and power-adjustable comfort for those who wanted even more luxury and convenience, Pontiac offered power-adjustable front seats. This was a big deal in the 1970s, as power seats were still considered a high-end feature. The system allowed 6-way adjustment, meaning drivers could fine-tune their seating position with just the push of a button. It was a small touch, but one that added to the feeling of effortless luxury. On certain models, the passenger side also had a reclining seat. This was a rare feature at the time, giving front passengers a way to lean back and relax during long drives. Today, we take these kinds of features for granted, but in 1977, this was cutting-edge comfort. The rear seat, a first-class experience. While the front seats were impressive, the real magic happened in the back. The Bonneville was built for comfort, and that extended to the rear passengers as well. The back seat was enormous, with enough space to stretch out and relax. Unlike modern sedans, which often feel cramped in the back, the Bonneville gave passengers plenty of legroom and headroom. The rear bench seat was just as plush as the front, with the same pillow-tufted velour or leather upholstery. The thick cushions made sure that even long road trips felt like a first-class experience. One detail that made the Bonneville stand out was the rear center armrest. Pulled it down and suddenly the back seat felt like a luxury lounge. It was a small feature, but one that made a big difference for those who wanted to ride in style. Door panels, soft, cushioned, and full of 1970s luxury Pontiac, didn't stop at just making the seats comfortable. The door panels were just as plush. Instead of hard plastics or bare metal, the Bonneville's door panels were padded and covered in the same velour or leather as the seats. This gave the entire cabin a warm, inviting atmosphere. Even the armrests were soft and cushioned, making sure that every point of contact felt luxurious. And then there were the chrome accents and wood-grain trim, giving the interior an upscale, high-end feel. It was a blend of classic American luxury and 1970s excess, and it worked beautifully. Seatbelt safety takes a backseat to comfort. One area where the Bonneville showed its age was in its seatbelt design. While modern cars have 3-point seatbelts in every position, many 1977 Bonnevilles still used lap belts for the rear passengers. This was simply how things were in the 1970-760 regulations weren't as strict, and manufacturers focused more on comfort than crash protection. Even in the front, some Bonneville models had separate lap and shoulder belts, which had to be fastened manually. It wasn't as convenient as today's integrated seatbelt designs, but back then most drivers weren't thinking about crash safety as much as we do today. A seating experience that defined an era. Everything about the Bonneville seats screamed 1970s luxury. From the pillow-tufted velour to the oversized bench seat, every detail was designed to make driving feel effortless and elegant. It was a time when comfort mattered more than sportiness, and the Bonneville delivered exactly that. Today's cars may have firmer, more supportive seats, but they don't have the same level of plush indulgence that Pontiac offered in 1977. For those who experienced it firsthand, sitting in a Bonneville wasn't just about getting from point A to point B. It was about sinking into a world of soft, luxurious relaxation, a world that sadly doesn't exist in modern cars anymore. A car's dashboard is more than just a control panel, it's the command center. And in the 1977 Pontiac Bonneville, it was a work of art. Unlike today's sleek, minimalistic dashboards, the Bonneville embraced bold design, oversized controls, and rich materials. It was a dashboard that made a statement, a symbol of power, presence, and prestige. Every inch was crafted to make the driver feel like they were sitting in something grand. The wood-grain panels, the chrome accents, and the deep-set gauges. It all came together to create an interior that felt more like a high-end lounge than a car. But Pontiac didn't just focus on looks. This dashboard was packed with technology and features that were ahead of their time, making the Bonneville not just luxurious, but also highly functional. A sea of wood grain and chrome, the signature look. Step inside the Bonneville, and your eyes were immediately drawn to the wood grain trim stretching across the dashboard. This wasn't just a small decorative panel. Pontiac covered nearly the entire dash in faux wood, giving it a rich upscale look. Paired with gleaming chrome accents, it made the interior feel expensive and sophisticated. The wood grain may have been artificial, but it didn't matter. In the 1970s, real wood wasn't the priority. Luxury was about the appearance of grandeur, and Pontiac delivered that in full. Even the glove compartment was designed to blend in seamlessly, with a wood grain panel and chrome handle that made it feel like a piece of fine furniture. Gauges, large, clear, and deep set for maximum impact. The instrument cluster in the Bonneville wasn't just functional, it was dramatic. Instead of the flat digital displays we see today, Pontiac used deep-set, circular gauges housed in individual chrome bezels. This gave the dashboard a three-dimensional look, making the dials feel substantial and important. Every dial was large, bold, and easy to read, with white lettering on a black background for maximum contrast. The speedometer stretched across the cluster, with a needle that glided smoothly across the numbers, reminding the driver that this was a car built for effortless cruising. To the left, the fuel gauge and temperature gauge sat neatly in their own circular pods, while the clock and optional tachometer occupied the right side. Unlike modern cars that bombard you with digital menus and complex settings, the Bonneville's gauges were simple, direct, and easy to understand, something that older drivers appreciated. Climate control, a step toward modern comfort. One of the most underrated features of the 1977 Bonneville was its climate control system. At a time when many cars still had basic heater sliders, Pontiac offered automatic climate control, allowing drivers to set a preferred temperature and let the system handle the rest. This was a luxury feature that wasn't common in most cars at the time. It made long drives more comfortable, eliminating the constant need to adjust fan speeds or temperature settings. For those who opted for the manual system, Pontiac still provided large, easy-to-use dials designed so that drivers could adjust the airflow without taking their eyes off the road. And let's not forget the ventilation system. The Bonneville had wide, rectangular air vents, positioned perfectly to circulate air efficiently throughout the cabin. This was an era before advanced air purifiers and dual-zone climate control, but Pontiac still ensured that the Bonneville's passengers rode in absolute comfort. The AM/FM stereo, a premium listening experience. In the 1970s, a good car stereo was a luxury, not a guarantee. And Pontiac made sure the Bonneville delivered a top-tier audio experience. Buyers could choose from a standard AM radio, an upgraded AM/FM stereo, or even an 8-track player for those who wanted to take their music on the road. The controls were simple and intuitive, with large push buttons for easy station selection. Unlike today's touchscreens, which often require multiple steps just to change a song, the Bonneville's radio allowed instant tuning with a satisfying mechanical click. The speakers, positioned throughout the cabin, provided rich, full sound, making every drive feel like a concert on wheels. And for those who wanted something truly special, Pontiac even offered a stereo with a built-in CB radio, giving drivers the ability to chat with other motorists long before cell phones became common. The ignition switch, a unique placement that defined an era. One detail that often surprises modern drivers is the placement of the ignition switch. Unlike today's cars, where the key goes near the steering wheel, or in some cases, there's no key at all, the 1977 Bonneville had its ignition switch on the dashboard itself. This was a carryover from the 1960s and early 70s, when dashboard mount ignitions were common in American cars. It gave the driver a feeling of piloting something substantial, almost like starting an airplane or a piece of industrial machinery. It was a small touch, but one that added to the Bonneville's character. A dash designed for long, relaxing drives. The real genius of the Bonneville's dashboard wasn't just in how it looked, but in how it felt. Everything was positioned for maximum ease of use. The large buttons, deep-set gauges, and simple controls were designed so that drivers could operate them without distraction. Unlike today's cars where touchscreens demand your attention, the Bonneville allowed you to keep your eyes on the road while adjusting settings by feel. It was a dashboard built for an era when driving was meant to be an experience, not a chore. When cars weren't just about getting from point A to point B, but about enjoying every mile in between. The wood grain, the chrome, the soft glow of the gauges at night, it all came together to create an interior that was warm, inviting, and undeniably luxurious. A dashboard like this isn't just a collection of switches and dials. It's a time capsule, a reminder of when cars had personality and presence. And for those lucky enough to have driven a 1977 Bonneville, they know nothing else feels quite like it. A car's steering wheel is more than just a tool. It's the connection between the driver and the road. And in the 1977 Pontiac Bonneville, this connection was designed to feel grand, comfortable, and effortless. At a time when many cars still had thin, basic steering wheels, Pontiac made sure the Bonneville's wheel felt substantial in the driver's hands. It was thick, padded, and wrapped in a soft material, ensuring a luxurious grip. The design wasn't just about looks. It was about making long highway drives feel smooth and fatigue-free. The two-spoke design, with a wide horizontal bar running across the center, gave the wheel a distinctive and confident look. This wasn't a small, sporty steering wheel. It was a commanding presence that reminded the driver they were in charge of something big and powerful. But Pontiac didn't just focus on style. They engineered the steering wheel to be functional and comfortable, with large, easy-to-reach controls that made driving feel like second nature. Horn and control placement built for intuitive operation. Unlike modern cars that rely on small, complicated buttons, the Bonneville's steering wheel had a massive horn pad, covering nearly the entire center of the wheel. This meant the driver never had to search for a tiny button in an emergency. Just press anywhere on the center pad and the horn would sound instantly. This design wasn't just about convenience, it was about safety and ease of use. In a time when reaction time mattered, Pontiac made sure that honking the horn was as natural as gripping the wheel itself. The turn signal stalk, positioned to the left of the wheel, was thick and sturdy, with a reassuring click when activated. It wasn't one of those flimsy levers that felt like it might snap. It was built to last. And for drivers who opted for cruise control, Pontiac integrated the controls right into the steering wheel, allowing for effortless highway driving. This was a feature that made long-distance trips more relaxing, especially on America's open highways. Power steering, the effortless glide. One of the most impressive features of the Bonneville's steering was its power-assisted feel. By the late 1970s, power steering had become a standard feature in luxury cars, but Pontiac took it a step further. The Bonneville system was exceptionally smooth, allowing the driver to maneuver this large vehicle with just a light touch. Turning the wheel in a modern car often requires some level of effort, but in the Bonneville, the steering was buttery soft, making tight turns and parking a breeze, despite the car's massive size. This was true American luxury, a car that lets you glide effortlessly down the road without feeling the weight of its size. It was a floating experience, one that drivers of today rarely get to enjoy. Tilt steering, a customizable driving position. Pontiac understood that not all drivers were the same, which is why they offered tilt steering in the Bonneville, a feature that was still a premium luxury in the 1970s. With a simple lever, the driver could adjust the steering wheel to their preferred angle, ensuring the most comfortable driving position. This was a game changer, especially for long road trips, where being able to fine-tune the wheel's position made a huge difference in fatigue and comfort. For taller drivers, it allowed more legroom. For shorter drivers, it brought the wheel closer for a better grip. It was a small touch, but one that made the Bonneville feel more personalized than many other cars of its time. Steering feedback, a different era of driving today. Modern cars are built with electric power steering, which often feels artificial and disconnected from the road. But in 1977, Pontiac's steering system still provided a level of road feel that many drivers today would find surprising. While the power assist made turning effortless, there was still a sense of connection between the tires and the pavement. Drivers could feel the subtle movements of the road, which added to the experience of being in control of a powerful machine. It was predictable, smooth, and confidence-inspiring, something that made the Bonneville a pleasure to drive, whether you were cruising on the highway or navigating through town. The luxury of effortless maneuvering, despite being a large, full-size sedan, the Bonneville never felt cumbersome or difficult to handle. Thanks to its well-tuned steering system, it delivered a driving experience that felt light, graceful, and incredibly refined. The combination of a wide steering wheel, smooth power steering, and a well-balanced chassis made it a car that could be driven for hours on end without fatigue. And let's not forget the steering wheel itself. With its wood grain accents, soft touch padding, and bold two-spoke design, it was more than just a piece of equipment. It was a symbol of 1970s luxury, a time when cars were built not just to move people, but to make them feel something. With every turn of the wheel, the Bonneville reminded its driver that they weren't just in a car, they were in a Pontiac, a name that stood for style, comfort, and prestige. A car's dashboard is more than just a panel. It's the control center of the entire driving experience. And in the 1977 Pontiac Bonneville, Pontiac designed it to be both visually striking and deeply functional. At first glance, the dashboard immediately commands attention. It stretches across the cabin like the control panel of a luxury aircraft, giving the driver a sense of authority over the car. The designers clearly wanted to blend modern convenience with a sense of grandeur, and they succeeded in ways that still feel remarkable today. One of the most striking details is the use of wood grain trim, a feature that was common in luxury cars of the era but executed to perfection in the Bonneville. Instead of cheap, artificial-looking plastic, Pontiac ensured the wood grain had depth and warmth, making the entire interior feel rich and inviting. The dashboard wasn't just about aesthetics. It was designed to be driver secret, placing every essential control within easy reach. The layout followed a logical flow, ensuring that the driver could access important functions without distraction. Instrumentation. A display of power and precision. Sitting directly in front of the driver was a large, easy-to-read instrument cluster, housed in a squared-off panel that exuded a sense of purpose and clarity. Unlike today's digital screens, which often feel overloaded with unnecessary information, the Bonneville's gauges were simple, bold, and highly legible. Pontiac focused on giving the driver only what they needed. Nothing more, nothing less. The speedometer took center stage, stretching across the display in a classic horizontal layout. Instead of the circular dials found in many cars today, Pontiac used a rolling drum-style speedometer, a design that gave the car a sense of old-school mechanical charm. Adjacent to it were the fuel gauge, temperature gauge, and voltage meter, all neatly arranged to provide instant feedback at a glance. There was no need to scroll through menus or navigate a touchscreen. Everything was right there, exactly where it should be. And then there was the tachometer, a feature often associated with sports cars. While the Bonneville wasn't designed for high-speed racing, Pontiac understood that some drivers still wanted to feel connected to the engine's performance. This was a car that rewarded attentive drivers, giving them all the vital information they needed to enjoy the drive without distractions. Warning lights, a smart approach to vehicle health. Instead of relying on a single generic warning light, the Bonneville had individual indicator lights for key systems like oil pressure, battery charge, and brake performance. This meant that if something went wrong, the driver knew exactly where to look instead of guessing. It was a system designed for practicality and peace of mind, reinforcing the idea that this car was built for serious, responsible drivers. The climate control system, comfort at your fingertips. A luxury car isn't just about power and performance. It's about making sure the driver and passengers feel completely at ease. That's where the Bonneville's climate control system played a crucial role. Positioned prominently on the dashboard, the controls were large, sturdy, and easy to adjust. Instead of tiny buttons or confusing menus, Pontiac used simple sliding levers, allowing drivers to instantly set the perfect temperature without taking their eyes off the road. And for those who wanted the ultimate convenience, Pontiac even offered automatic climate control, a rare feature in the 1970s that adjusted fan speed and temperature automatically to maintain a consistent cabin climate. This wasn't just an ordinary feature. It was a luxury statement, proving that Pontiac wanted drivers to experience effortless comfort no matter the season. Radio and entertainment, the sound of the 1970s. For many drivers, music and driving go hand in hand, and Pontiac understood this well. That's why they designed the Bonneville's radio and sound system to be both powerful and user-friendly. The AM/FM stereo was centrally located, with large tuning and volume knobs that were easy to adjust even while driving. There was no need to fumble with tiny buttons. Just reach, turn, and enjoy. And for those who wanted the latest in audio technology, Pontiac offered an 8-track tape player, allowing drivers to bring their favorite albums along for the ride. In an era before CDs, MP3s, or streaming services, this was a big deal. It meant that drivers could experience high-quality, immersive sound, transforming the Bonneville's cabin into a rolling concert hall. Dashboard storage, functionality meets convenience. Pontiac also made sure the Bonneville's dashboard wasn't just about looks and entertainment, it was about practicality. The glove compartment was spacious enough to store essential documents, maps, and even a pair of driving gloves, a nod to an era when driving was seen as an art form, not just a necessity. But what really set the Bonneville apart was its hidden storage compartments, discreetly integrated into the design. Some models even featured a fold-down tray, perfect for placing small items like sunglasses, coins, or a notepad. It was clear that Pontiac designed this dashboard with the driver in mind, ensuring that everything had its rightful place. The overall feel, a dashboard that exuded confidence. What made the Bonneville's dashboard truly special wasn't just its wood grain accents, large gauges, or intuitive controls. It was the way everything came together seamlessly.